Hi, I'm John Azak.
I'm Sam Azak.
And we're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk particularly about the delayed sleep-wake phase, eveningness, or the night owl. That necessarily means that we've also got to talk about the advanced phase. Now, this is very important, and it's a sort of missing aspect in medicine and in the study of health. And it's kind of, well, I think it's because there is still this sort of unconscious idea, this idea that's not talked about, that people who sleep late are night creatures, creatures of the dark.
Or lazy. Sorts
Lazy.
of negative stereotypes. Yeah.
Yeah, and bohemian, debauched.
Yes.
And I'd like to say that sadly I'm not, and I never have been. I don't go out clubbing and spend my nights drinking or any of that kind of thing. I'm largely at home working, spending time with my friends. I don't go to bars, I don't go partying, all that. However, when I was 11 years old, I asked my mum if I could not go to church on a Sunday morning, which was something up until then I'd done every Sunday morning. And surprisingly, as I look back, she didn't argue. I was basically saying I was willing to go to the service that's called Evensong in the late afternoon, but she didn't. She believed, she was an Anglican, and it was important to her. But the reason that I wanted to not go to church on a Sunday morning was because I started feeling very tired during the week. And so I was sleeping in on a Saturday morning till 11 o'clock or noon. And I wanted to do the same on a Sunday morning. My dad called me Oblomov very soon after this. For the Russian character, there's a great Nikita Mikhalkov film of Oblomov, a novel by Goncharov. And it's basically, well, tell him what Oblomov is, what the film's about.
Oh, God.
Rich landlord.
Yeah, a rich landlord basically spends all his time sleeping as a servant, do everything for it. I think the film's about one of his old friends trying to gradually bring him back out of this.
And very nearly doing so.
Yeah, very nearly.
But he's idle, and so he loses everything. His estate is stolen from him. So you just have him and his grumpy old servant, who's a remarkable actor. So that was my dad's pet name for me, because I wanted to sleep late in the morning. I was Oblomov. And that concealed something which only became evident to me many years later when I looked after my mum during the last years of her life. And she opened up and talked about many things. I learned many very interesting things about her life and my dad's life. But with my dad, she'd not really noticed that he didn't actually go to bed until about 4 in the morning. And he would have 3 or 4 hours sleep, and then he'd get up. And in the afternoons, he would nap. In the evenings, he'd fall asleep, for sort of 20 minutes at a time. And he was tired all of the time. Not the Christmas before he died. He apologised to me for not spending any time with me when I was a child, because he just couldn't deal with it. That he did his work, then he got home and he sort of hid behind his Financial Times, or went into the garden if possible and worked on his own, because, as he said, he couldn't deal with people. And I think part of that was that he had a delayed sleep-wake phase. Now, tell us a little about your experience of this. When did you start feeling it was difficult to...
12?
Yeah, I think it was about then.
Yeah. And it sort of slowly progressed from there and got quite bad around 15, 16.
Well, by the time you were 15, you came here when you were 15.
Oh, right, okay. So was it 14?
16, I don't remember actually.
One
It
of
was be 3 years ago, wasn't it, this year?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
And what happened to you? You went to doctors, and what did they decide about
They
your
told me
condition?
well, they thought I had chronic fatigue syndrome eventually, and their general advice was to wake up 15 minutes earlier, which wasn't very helpful.
And so you were going into school, and what would happen then?
I'd go in, and then I'd pretty much go straight. They had this, I can't remember what they called it.
Learning centre.
Yeah, learning centre, something like that. I'd go there, I'd sit in there, I'd get them to call my mother to come pick me up, and then I'd go and stare at the wall opposite for me until school ended, in which case, and then I'd be brought, and then school would end, I'd be brought home, and then I'd go to sleep, pretty much.
And how did you feel during that time? What sort of symptoms did you have?
Headache, constant headache, pain, nervousness. I had a hand tremor constantly.
Which meant that you would drop cups and things.
Yeah.
And your focus, there were times when you'd come back from school and you wouldn't remember anything.
Yeah, it's very disorienting.
So disorienting works for Americans, disorientating for British. It's very complexities of language, folks. So you would have an amnesiac fugue. That's the term that I finally dug out of a medical book that none of the medical people used. They talked about brain fog. You found it difficult to concentrate. You had muscle pains all the time. This sort of palsied tremor. What about your mood?
Oh, well, when I felt something, it was usually very distressed, depressed, that sort of thing.
And this carried on for about 3 years with consultants and doctors deciding you had chronic fatigue syndrome. You do look a little fatigued today, actually, and you're yawning. Just to make a point here.
Yeah.
And that's a diagnosis for life, isn't it? We were told that only 2% of people recover from it, that you are going to feel crap for a lifetime, which is, for a teenager, that's a great thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a great thought.
That you are disabled and your life's going to be rubbish. You came here in July 2017, moved here. From round the corner where your mum lives. And what did I do? What was the treatment that I used?
Go to sleep when you feel like it and wake up when you feel like it.
And what time did you find you were waking up during that period? Do you remember? I do.
Was it around 2:30?
It was around 2:30. And that'd be in the summertime when the clocks are... So that's 1:30 in real time, Greenwich Mean Time. And... you also had auditory processing disorder.
Oh, yeah.
And that was diagnosed way back. And that means that, do you want to say what auditory processing disorder is? I'm quite happy to.
It's auditory dyslexia, basically. You can't make out what somebody's saying, which can get quite annoying when you have to ask somebody 5 or 6 times to repeat what they've just said to you.
Yeah, makes life difficult.
Also, I had episodes where it's very... Not only where I wouldn't remember things, but episodes where I found it very difficult to remember anything. So, being in a conversation with somebody and suddenly you just forget everything, which is very weird. Where
the working memory, the short-term memory just
gives up on you.
Stops working. That auditory processing disorder was separately diagnosed. That was the first diagnosis you had. And... as I remember, what happened was that not long after you came here, you got quite excited because you were listening to some music on headphones and you could make out the lyrics.
I couldn't find it. Yeah, that's right.
So all of these symptoms which are associated with chronic fatigue might be explained by a delayed sleep-wake phase. Delayed sleep-wake phase now. Up until about 3 years ago, let's backtrack a little bit actually, when Sam's older brother, Ben, who's now about 35 or something, let me count.
Something like that.
Yeah, he's just about 35. He too, at the age of 12, started to develop difficulties, and I got him off to a sleep clinic, hospital sleep clinic, and he was diagnosed with what was then called delayed sleep phase syndrome. It's now called delayed sleep-wake phase as of about a year and a half ago. And I actually got into a little bit of a disagreement with a professor of neurology who's an expert on sleep about this before the title of telling him that from my point of view, the waking is as important as the sleeping, that we tend to have a fixed time of waking, not simply a fixed time of sleeping. I was led to believe that 1.9% of people suffer from this. So my oldest boy was diagnosed. My daughter is diagnosed. She was only diagnosed a couple of years ago. And eventually, Sam and his brother Dan, who went to a sleep clinic at Hallam University, which proved to be not very effective at all, frankly. The doctor doing the study didn't seem to know how to do a polysomnograph study, an actigraph study. It was a mess.
Yeah, I woke up at 5 in the morning, which probably doesn't help that much.
You were all over the place, basically. That was before he moved here. Then we did another actigraph, which is where you have a little watch type thing you wear on your wrist. And for a couple of weeks, it measures some very simple things. In fact, the Fitbit watches will actually measure more in terms of, they can tell you whether you're in deep sleep or lighter sleep as well. But because it can take your temperature all the time, your temperature goes down when you're asleep, your core body temperature. Your heart rate slows, your breathing slows. If you get more subtle about it, your brain waves change, and you have theta or theta waves, depending on whether you're American or British in your pronunciation of Greek. And basically, I was told that 1.9% of people have this night owl condition. I found long ago, I struggled with it for 10 years, getting up in the morning because I had to get up in the morning. And I realized that I couldn't concentrate. And to me, that was the most important thing. I also realized that I had mood swings, that I would get kind of a little too elated, almost like hypomania. And I would also slump into a kind of distress. And that by sleeping at the time that my body dictated, that went away. And my concentration, I'm reasonably well known for my memory. And it is badly afflicted if you don't sleep properly. I was told that 1.9% of people have this strange and terrible disorder. Then there was a study of 433,000 people in what's called the UK Bio Cohort. That was by Northwestern University in Chicago and the University of Surrey. And they asked people what time they preferred to sleep. And 9% presented with what they call eveningness, which is to say they like to get up, they go to bed a little bit later or a lot later, and it can vary what time you sleep and wake. For me, it's more or less 4 in the morning till noon, and that's been described as the most common phase. I'm not sure if there's more up-to-date work on that, though that was 20 years ago. And what they found with this study was that 9% of people said that they preferred to go to bed and get up later. That, given the choice, that's what they'd do. Now, a paediatrician very kindly went through the study with me and pointed out because I was talking about the boys and their difficulties. She pointed out that this was based on personal reporting, 433,000 people based on imagine what it would take to do an actigraph study for 2 weeks on that many people. That would probably be a bit difficult. And she's right that we shouldn't take personal reporting directly, that we do need to do more work. However, I think she was right in the wrong way, because I think that most people, or many people, feel that it'd be an admission of weakness to say that they sleep at this time. That's certainly my experience with quite a number of people I've known over the years, my father particularly, that my mother, living with him for 50 years, more than 50 years, was not aware that he was coming to bed late, that he was not getting to sleep till late. I pointed out to her that he'd bought a very expensive radio with a very long antenna that went out into the garden from the house, so that he could pick up Russian stations, because he was learning Russian at the end of his life. He already spoke 8 other languages. What a show-off. So polyglot, that's what they call them. And he was staying up into the early hours listening to this radio, and she kind of knew that, but she hadn't connected it. And I think he felt ashamed that he was weak because of this sleep cycle. So I would say that 9% is an underestimation. And there are a few sleep experts who agree with me. In fact, I've seen one expert say that it's about 25% of the population. The other end, you have what's called advanced sleep-wake phase syndrome or disorder. I'm not sure why it's a disorder, but we're not disorderly at all. You're disorderly?
Very organised.
Very orderly. And that means that you fall asleep early in the evening when the sun goes down, and you wake when the sun comes up. That's the advanced phase. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy and wealthy and wise. And as my father used to tell me, the early bird catches the worm. And I told him I didn't want to catch worms, because it's a disease, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that one's attributed to. Early bird catches the worm. It's not true. The worms actually come up when it rains.
Yes.
And there's no time of day that's going to be associated with. Sorry.
No.
That's
very sensible.
Things we believe just because of proverbs that we haven't examined.
The apple falls far from the tree.
And it's not true, because the apples is more likely to be determined by the father than the mother. And so it'll be the apple that pollinated it rather than the apple at the tree that it falls near. There you go. There's another piece of arcane proverbial wisdom for you. So here we have this condition which people would rather ignore, they feel ashamed of. Most of the people I know who have it fight it. I've been told by one of them that while he's been diagnosed with the condition, that it doesn't fit in with modern life and he has to get up in the morning. And he admits that it makes him irritable, which is not really good for society, let's face it. Though I must say I don't find him irritable. I think he controls it very well. And it affects his memory. It also affects concentration, but it also appears to affect the immune system. And Sam dug out a little statement by one of the authors of the study of 433,000 people, which he will now read to us in full, glorious Technicolor.
They also found a 10% increase in death in the...
earlier death.
Yeah.
Now, it's not that much earlier, but it is earlier.
Yeah. So this is from Knutson, one of the authors. Hope I'm saying that properly. We think it is at least partly due to our biological clocks. We think the problem is that night owls are forced to live in a more lark world. Forced to.
Now, we long ago moved into a society that functions 24/7. And what would tend to happen is that night owls will find work, if they're sensible and if they can. They'll find work that is in the evening. I had a friend who was a telephone operator for 11 years, an extraordinarily bright man. And he basically swapped shifts so that he could always be on the night shift. And that was fine for him. And then he took a job in management, and they'd been pushing him for a long time to take a job in management because he was intelligent, had a good degree. And he took the job, and it meant he had to get up at 6 in the morning. And that meant that he slept until noon on a Saturday, until 2 or 3 in the afternoon on a Sunday. He'd be exhausted, and then he'd be back to it on a Monday. I'm not sure what he's up to now. He's retired, so I hope he's sleeping when it suits him. There's also another peculiarity, which around about the age of 55, melatonin release changes in the human brain, and it becomes easier to get up in the morning. And I have to really emphasize the strain it can put upon you. That I haven't had a flu for at least 30 years now. I've not had a bad cold in that time, and I do attribute that to a significant extent to sleeping at the right time. Sleeping at the time that's dictated. Now let's talk about that. I would say that our sleep time is almost mechanically determined. So if you try and change it, you are going against nature. And that determinism, we now know, and actually the first genes were discovered in, I think, 1986, and that was the PER3 gene. PER genes are periodicity genes. Since then, the CRY1 gene has been found. The discoverers of the PER3 gene, it was considered such an important discovery that eventually they were given the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
But it still hasn't penetrated the popular consciousness. There's still this shame, guilt about not sleeping at the right time.
Yeah, and think about the harm this can cause. I mean, you said the other day that you reckon something like a third of road accidents could be attributed.
A third of road accidents are indeed attributed to sleep deprivation. If we look at, I have here a book, which is called Rhythms of Life, and sadly it's out of print now. It was published in 2004, and it introduced a subject called chronobiology. In chronobiology, what they've found is that if you give somebody chemotherapy, that if you give them the drug at the right time in their metabolic cycle, they need less of it, and it therefore has lower side effects. The same is true for surgery, that if it's performed at the right time, now in this country, most hospital appointments seem to be in the morning. And so you go along and, what will happen is that because your body clocks determine your core body temperature, brain waves, your heart rate, all of these things, that you will actually be being examined while half asleep. There is a condition that can come from not sleeping according to your cycle, and it's called free running. All 4 of my children are diagnosed with delayed sleep-wake phase by sleep specialists, by different sleep specialists as well, I hasten to add, in case there's any confusion about it being one person who's telling us all this. I've been diagnosed 3 times by 3 different people over the years. And you can get into a situation where and I've seen all 4 of my children do this, you no longer have a set sleep period because you fought against it or somebody's forced you to do otherwise. So you might sleep for 10 hours, wake for 6 hours, sleep for 3 hours, wake for 16 hours, sleep for 9 hours. It goes out of the window, and you need to regulate that back, because what will then happen is that you'll have an overlap between waking and sleeping states. It was particularly profound with my oldest boy and my daughter during their teens, when you could see that they were basically dreaming while they were awake, which is a very odd state of affairs.
I got to a point where I found it very difficult to distinguish between dreams and reality because I was so out of it.
Yeah, and I think a great many people have a problem with that. And,
Okay.
We're not going to talk about who they voted for, but they're not distinguishing reality, that's for sure. Sorry, Boris. His middle name's something like Pepper, isn't it? Feifel.
Really?
His real name is Alexander Feifel Johnson. Yeah, but we wish him well at the moment because he has the COVID-19 and hope he recovers well. And maybe it makes him a better human being. We all hope to become better human beings. So if you mess with sleep, then you can get into a lot of problems. As I said, people will choose a career. There'll be musicians. So we'll hear about them, like Jimi Hendrix, for example, staying up till 6 a.m. every morning and working like hell. That guy just never stopped working. When he was not playing gigs, he'd wander around with a 2-track Revox tape recorder in one hand and a guitar in the other, find another club and go and jam with people and record it all, which is why there are hundreds of hours of recordings of Hendrix, most of them not very good quality. But, his playing is worth listening to.
Get somebody to clean them up.
Which Jimi Hendrix has been doing for many years and profiting. We're all looking forward to September the 18th this year when the Hendrix estate opens after 50 years.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to get all of those things like the Albert Hall film, which have never been released because of battles over copyright and who's going to get the money. And that's another topic, which I can wax unlyrical about at some other point. But people like, many musicians are night owls. Many actors, I think that we see actors who made films when they were younger, like Tom Courtenay, for example, was a film star in the UK, and then they disappear from the screen. And you wonder about that, and you find that they're doing stage stuff. Now, stage has its matinee, which is to say its morning, in the afternoon. So they can actually sleep properly. And I wonder to what extent that affects their judgment, because while there is this kind of, there used to be, this kind of idea that it was a superior thing to be on the stage, and that movies were kind of... I think we're probably past that. I think it's probably true to say that, from the 30s onward, cinema is, probably before that, Eisenstein was producing fantastic work a very long time ago. Fritz Lang, lots of great directors have made great movies which have stood the test of time and are as worthy as Shakespeare from my point of view, particularly things like The Chimes of Midnight by Orson Welles, which is Shakespeare. But so that kind of snobbish attitude of stage towards film, I think there might be something that's actually just to do with when you wake, because film starts when the sun comes up. You want that light often. And so actors are at a different time, according to what they do. I think, and then you get people who, they're barkeepers or they work at a gas station at night. And they're not necessarily realising that it's because they feel better and because they're actually probably healthier. Subsequent to the study of 433,000 people, there was another study of more than 600,000 people in the UK bio cohort. Northwestern University in Chicago is the leading place for study of sleep. What will happen if you go along to your doctor and if you get diagnosed is that you'll be offered melatonin, which is one of the sleep hormones, and blue light these days. So the idea will be that you will push your clock forward by 3 hours. You'll go to bed 3 hours later every day until you get to the point where, as a sleep specialist, a couple of sleep specialists told me, is normal time. And I don't like being called abnormal, by the way. And when you get to waking at 7 a.m. by pushing the clock forward, you will take melatonin, to get an hour and 20 minutes before you go to sleep, guys. And there are many different forms of it, and the ones that you buy over the counter are not fully tested, I'm afraid. The one that is popular among clinicians is actually, I believe, extracted from cow's brains. Oh. But you can get vegetable forms, which I'm told, though. Plants sleeping, I don't really know about. But Circadin is the only one that I've been told is fully approved. I could be wrong, but it was a sleep specialist who told me that Circadin is the one that's approved, which you can only get on prescription in the United Kingdom. You take that, then you wake up at the allotted time, and you either go out and get a good dose of sunshine, because that's meant to wake you up, or you put blue light, blue LEDs, because it is the blue light that is the stuff that wakes you up, which is why you're not meant to have blue light on for an hour or two before you go to sleep at night, by the way. So you put your computer over to brown light instead of blue, or phone, or whatever, you don't watch the telly, all of those things. Now, I question this, because when Sam first came here, he was sleeping with a window that was east-facing, and sometimes he would forget to pull the blind down. And I woke a couple of hours earlier than he did, and I'd sort of tiptoe in to have a look at him, and he would be fast asleep. And he was slept through full sunshine coming down on him. Now, we're told that's light that wakes us up. I think that might prove to be a medical myth. So the blue light, the only study I've seen, and hopefully intelligent and better studied people than I will watch this video and explain if there is other evidence. The only study I've seen suggests that the melatonin blue light ritual works for 42% of people, which is to say it's little more than 10% above placebo.
Yeah, and if I'm right, those people weren't tested for their health. It was just self-reported that it had worked for them.
Yeah, it's a really important point, that there isn't a 2 or 3 year follow-up period to measure their health, and their health wasn't measured. All that's being measured is whether they're still getting up in the morning after a particular period of time. And that is useless, frankly, because if it's making you ill, it's making you less capable, then it's a very bad idea. We haven't focused on the advanced phase. I have one very close friend who I used to work with. We did interventions together with members of authoritarian groups, and it was brilliant because she had the advanced and we could cover 24 hours of the day between us, and occasionally that did prove to be very useful. I don't think that the stereotype of early birds and worms, or Satanism and people who stay up at night, is a sensible one. I'd also like to point out that every population that's been studied, including tribal populations in Africa, every population that's been studied has a proportion of people who have a delayed sleep phase, and that there's a very obvious evolutionary reason for that. That it means that there's somebody awake all the time and somebody on guard all of the time. You don't need to keep geese like the Romans did. Don't you know about the geese?
No.
Well, the geese squawk when anybody comes near, so it wakes people up. Because there'll be somebody awake. It's also worth saying that many esteemed human beings have actually had a delayed sleep phase. When Rodin made his rejected study of the great writer Balzac, wonderful sculpture, the reason it was rejected is because he was in what's called a morning gown or a dressing gown, because that was how he lived. So he worked through the night, and many artists do. It used to be that painters didn't, because without artificial light, you can't really paint. Georges Seurat, the so-called pointillist, he called it divisionism himself, post-impressionist, late 19th century, wonderful, brilliant painter. He actually used to put candles in his hat. And we can say that he had problems because he only lived to be 36. So don't put candles in your hat. That's our recommendation. Or paint in little dabs of colour either, because I did it when I was a teenager, I admit it.
Into it.
But I'm past it now. So The point is this. I have many times, there are pillars of health. One of them is diet. And the big one there, I think, is watch out for the quantity of refined sugar in your diet and watch out for the quantity of fat in your diet. These are, whatever else we believe philosophically, these two things can be quite dangerous for you. Sugar, I think, being the more dangerous one. I think it affects mood. It certainly affects metabolism. It's worth knowing, therefore, in terms of diet, that if you don't sleep at the time that suits you, then what will happen is that your digestion will go. This has been studied in shift workers. And if you go to our own National Health Service, you'll find, sadly, there are many, particularly nurses, who are overweight. And I'm pretty thoroughly convinced that's because their sleep patterns have been broken. They've been forced to work at times when they're not really awake, which isn't very good if you're a patient, by the way.
No.
And there's this culture within medicine in this country where if you can't stay awake for 80 hours, you can't be a doctor or a nurse. So we are excluded as a group from that. And that is utterly stupid. The idea of having anybody do a job for more than probably 10 hours is crazy because their focus will be gone. And if they're dealing with your health, that's a very, very stupid idea. It also means that those people will be biased against people who have sleep disorders because they will think, well, you've just got to be tough.
Just force yourself.
Yes, just make yourself do it. And that's not really good. Exercise is the third pillar. So we have diet, exercise, and sleep. And sleep is just, if you change that, if you find your own sleep pattern, and that is to say, you switch off the alarm clock, you find a period of a couple of weeks, and you note when you feel tired, you go to bed and sleep. Anytime, go and sleep. Wake up naturally when you wake up. You may find that you have a split sleep cycle. Many people sleep for a few hours, wake for an hour, and then go back to sleep. And it's okay to get up and read a book. Probably not a good idea to watch the TV or use anything with blue light. I'm not totally sure. I know people who do watch the TV in that hour and then go back to bed quite happily. Some people actually have siesta, so they will sleep for 6 hours during the night, and then they'll sleep the hot part of the day. In Spain, that's where the word comes from. And so in the middle of the day, they all go off and the shops all close. When we were in Spain, remember that? The shops are closing in the middle of the day. Like, what's wrong? I want some chips. So that's another way of sleeping. And then there are people who actually have 4 sleep periods. So there isn't a rule about this. And the thing that I'm really, really, really trying to get over is it's fixed. It's something you are born with. And one of the mistakes, again, I got into it with a sleep doctor on this, because he was insistent that melatonin is that's what matters. And I was saying, well, what about the chemicals that wake you up? And there are 2 forms. Hypocretin is also known as orexin. And you've got, I think it's hypocretin 1 and hypocretin 2 and orexin A and orexin B. It could be the other way around, the A and B, the 1 and 2. It's the same. It's a name for the same chemical, but it wakes you up. And the reason I say that melatonin is one of the sleep hormones is because I know that with orexin, if you don't have cortisol, which is also called the anxiety chemical, if you don't have that as well, you don't wake up properly. You feel groggy. You don't feel focused. And people will therefore substitute caffeine normally for cortisol. And not a big fan of caffeine, personally.
Me neither.
A bit sensitive to it. So I don't drink coffee, I don't drink tea. We drink rooibos.
Yeah.
Yes, there's another TikTok rooibos, organic, from South Africa. Fantastic.
Definitely not sponsored.
Definitely not. We sponsor them. Really.
Yeah, we sponsor
That's the truth of it. One day they'll realise that and send us free tea. Not really tea, actually. It's a tisane. But we're not going to get We're going to get technical about that. So the waking chemical, the sleeping chemical, these are things that are happening inside your body. And you can believe in willpower if you want to. But I would recommend finding your sleep cycle and seeing what difference it makes to your health, what difference it makes to the functioning of your metabolism, which in turn determines your immune system. And I think, we're going to talk about this later. I keep saying that, don't we, about things. We're going to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome. But then in a nutshell, what we're going to say is that at the moment, this has become almost fashionable. That in the learning centre, how many kids would be in there when you went in there?
10.
Yeah. And how did they look? Did they look fully awake? And
they had bags under their eyes. They were tired, you could tell.
Yeah. And they're being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. They're being told they have an incurable disability, that they'll feel rotten for the rest of their lives. They're being given melatonin, which quite evidently is not making them feel perky. Mm-hmm. And they're not getting an education. And I think that any doctor, any specialist, these are paediatricians, who is dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome, needs first of all to find out if the fatigue comes from the wrong sleep cycle. Mm. Let's also say that in this country, as far as I know, there is only one school that has late afternoon and evening sessions. It's incredible. So kids are going into school. We know that the melatonin shift, that basically, babies go to sleep quite early and sleep a very long time, just like Lucy the cat. And then as you get into puberty around age 11 to 13, say, your melatonin release will move forward. And I think we'll probably find other genes and other enzymes that are involved here. But your melatonin moves forward. And with many teenagers, it's very well known, they find it hard to get up in the morning. Well, it could be because they actually have delayed sleep-wake phase. And it could be that we're forcing them to do something that is damaging to their health by not, and to teachers as well, by not having schools that run into the early evening at least. And, in the US, they actually moved school times forward an hour in the 70s when the first discoveries about shift work were coming out. It used to be the rule under the Federal Aviation Authority in the US that pilots were not allowed to sleep while on the plane, even though you'd have a pilot and a co-pilot. Whereas the British pilots were under a different rule where they could actually go and they have these little cots and they can go and have a nap. And what they found was that pilots were actually micro-sleeping. So you can't not sleep. And you can see it from flickering of the eyes. And they found that pilots, who of course only do the takeoff and the landing normally, the computer does the rest, though they need to be there to make sure the computer doesn't do the kind of things that the 737 MAX has been doing, that it crashes the plane for you and there's nothing you can do about it. Bless you, Boeing, for not admitting that.
I was thinking more Space Odyssey with that.
Yeah, that's a movie.
Oh.
Yeah, that's not real.
Not real?
No. It was the two Boeing aeroplanes that went down, killed hundreds of people. Stanley Kubrick's movie, that one, Clockwork Orange.
Give me your nuts. Okay, yeah.
I'm half crazy just for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage. We can't afford a carriage, but you'll look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle made for two. A tandem.
Yeah, okay, I apologise.
These pilots were microsleeping while they were landing the planes. So the Federal Aviation Authority changed the rules. So this is one of the most important things in terms of health and in terms of changing society and making people less nasty. Because let's face it, when people tough it out, they don't have empathy. They become irritable. And we'd like to see a world where people grow up, where people look after each other, and where health is significant for all of us, rather than the kind of psychopathic mess of a world in which we live at the moment, where people do not care enough and go on about how nice the chocolate cake is when they've just fired missiles and things like that, not naming any names.
No.
Don.
Don.
The Don. So that's it for the moment about sleep. We will talk about it again. And thank you for giving this time. And please, get into the comments. I want to see a discussion. I want to be asked questions. I want Alicia Montero and David Rogers to say something every time I speak, because they often do. And it's very, very helpful to me, guys. And I'm still at this point John Atack.
I'm still at this point Sam Atack.
Wow.
Wow.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.